I want to take you through each of the brushes, the 6 brushes that I use, to give you an idea of what each brush is capable of. And for this, I'm going to start with the 3/4 inch flat brush, which is the biggest one that I have. And this is a great brush if you're doing skies or foregrounds. So let's just demonstrate what the brush does. I have a pre-mixed wash here of cerulean blue and water with a little bit of Winsor blue into it. And I'm just going to load the brush up and set it right into the middle of the paper. So if I push that around, you can see that it covers area very, very quickly. Just pushing that around, and then let's spread the wash out on the paper. You can see that the brush allows the paper to be covered very, very quickly. Now, if you were doing a sky, you'd be using a technique like this. So what I want to do now is bleed a darker colour into that. Say, for instance, you were bleeding a cloud into the sky. It's very easy just to use the 3/4 inch brush, set the wash down, and you can see what's happening there. Immediately, the wash is bleeding in. So let's push that in, and you can see that by twisting the brush, rolling it to the left, rolling it to the right, rolling it to the left, you can very quickly get a cloud effect. Now, sometimes whenever you put a cloud in, you're going to have to blend the brush again. So let's just clean the brush off, and I can use the brush in its dry state to blend the edges of a cloud, just by pushing it around the edges of the darker wash and pulling it through that wash. You can see that the brush is ideal for that type of work. But it's not only good for doing a big wash like that, you can also use the brush if you wanted to do a large blocking area. Say, for instance, a large window pane. I'll just do it here. And you can see with one stroke of the brush, you can get one window pane. Next door to that, you can get another. Again, just below that, you can get another one. And here, another one. So the brush has more than one use, and there, very, very quickly, it has blocked in the shape of a window. Now, obviously, it's not an exact shape of window, but it gives you the idea that the brush has more than one use. If you turn the brush on its edge and use it pushing the hairs against the grain, you can also get grass-like effects. And that's whenever you just flick the brush like that. And you can see there that very quickly you're getting broken grass and tufts. Again, if you just bang the brush slightly on the surface of the paper, you can get very thin grass-like effects if you were doing large reeds or rushes in the foreground. So that's a few of the uses of the brush. But it can also be used whenever you're going to paint grass in the foreground and blend the grass in the foreground. Let me just wash it off for a second. Whenever you're washing a brush, always twist it against the side of the bucket so that you get all of the dirt out of the hairs of the brush, and then squeeze it between your finger and thumb just to make sure that all of the residue of the paint has gone. Let's go into a light green wash here, and this is a wash that we're going to use for the foreground. And if I put this on very, very quickly again, just by sweeping the brush across the paper, you can see that it covers that area very, very quickly. The brush is used in a very, very loose technique. Then getting into the darker green, I'm going to bleed some of this through the wash that I've just put on. And again, using the very corner of the brush this time to pull in a thin line of wash. You don't always have to use it flat on or square on. You can use the corner of it, you can use the angles of the brush just to pull in darker veins through the green. Now, squeezing that brush between finger and thumb on a piece of kitchen roll, I can then blend those washes through. So there you go. That's the 3/4 inch brush used to put on big washes. It can also be used for very fine lines. I'm going to take a very dark wash here from the palette that I've pre-mixed. This was light red and neutral tint. And if I use the very corner of the brush this time, you can see I've turned the brush square on. And just pulling that down, you can see that I can get very, very fine lines. You wouldn't normally associate this brush with fine lines. But again, it can be used in many, many different ways. If I turn the brush on its chisel edge, you can get very, very fine lines that way. Horizontal fine lines, just by pulling the brush across like that. And that's the way you would use it whenever you're painting the surface of water sometimes, or reflections on the water. You'll be putting little ripples on the water with the 3/4 inch brush, just by pulling it back and forth like that. And you can get some very fine lines very, very quickly. It saves having to change brushes too often. But with any brush, whenever you're using it, the more pressure you put on the paper, the thicker the line is going to be. So if I put pressure on the paper, you can see I've got a thick line. As I pull down and lift the pressure off, you're always going to get a thinner taper. So there's thick and thin, thick and thin. So that's something you're going to have to practice with the brush. putting pressure onto the paper. I'll do some over here just by using the brush sideways on. So pressing the brush down, you get a thick line. Lifting the brush up, you get a tapered line. And that's something that you're going to have to practice, to get thick and thin lines just by lifting the pressure off the brush. But the more you use the brush, the more it becomes part of your hand. And that's the 3/4 inch finished with. Let me take this sheet of paper off, and I can move on now and show you the number 8 brush. Again, if you look at it there, the number 8 brush is quite a fine point. It's a round brush. It's got a round ferrule instead of a flat ferrule. This can be used to cover area pretty quickly.